Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to have you here. My name is Ilana Sobel, and I'm a faculty member of the Department of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Brandeis. My research focuses on modern Hebrew literature, gender-based violence, and disability studies. I welcome you all to the first talk of the new series of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, Performing Disability in Israel. The series explores real-life experiences and artistic performances of people living with disability in Israel, and it examines the ways performance of disability on stage, on the screen, and in everyday life raises questions about Israeli subjectivity. I would like to thank our co-sponsors for supporting this series: the Hadassah Brandeis Institute, the Department of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies, the Luria Institute for Disability Policy, and the Program in Health, Science, Society, and Policy. I'm so grateful to my TA Shira Cohen and the amazing students in my course, Disability Cultures, Art, Film, and Literature of People with Disabilities, for being here today, and I'm pleased to welcome all the guests. I especially want to thank Gili Hammer for being here this afternoon, and the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies for making this wonderful event possible. I would like to extend a special thank you to Professor Jonathan Sarna, Director of the Schusterman Center, as well as to Dr. Shana Wise, Assistant Director of the Schusterman Center, for her wisdom and irresistible enthusiasm. I'm also deeply grateful to other members of the Schusterman team, Risa Singer, Anna Simpson, Karen Goodbald, and Wendy Schwartz, for their kindness, help, and cooperation in facilitating this event. It is my great pleasure to introduce Gili Hammer, our speaker today, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the Program in Cultural Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She's the author of the book Blindness Through the Looking Glass, The Performance of Blindness, Gender, and the Sensory Body, published by the University of Michigan Press in 2019. Her current project examines sensory practices and embodied politics in integrated dance projects that bring together dancers with and without disabilities in Israel and in the US, and it focuses on the ways corporeal otherness is represented, negotiated, and regulated in public spheres. The title of Professor Hammer's talk today is Disability on and Off Stage in Israel and the US, Blind Women's Gender Performance and Integrated Dance. Two things before I hand over the floor to Professor Hammer. First, Dr. Shana Wise will moderate the Q&A after the talk. Please send all your questions to the chat and she will collect them. We would like to give priority to students' questions. So if you are a student, please identify yourself as such in the chat. Also, kindly note that live capturing is available. You can turn it off if you'd like, and the option to do so is at the bottom of your screen where it says live transcript. Professor Hammer, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited. You may hear it in my voice. I'm really happy to be here, talking to you from Tel Aviv. It's 9 p.m. here, so you may feel some evening energies coming from this side of the screen. I would like to thank Professor Ilana Sobel for inviting me to present my work and for organizing this event, to Anna Simpson from the Schusterman Center for taking care so wonderfully of all the logistics, and to the Schusterman Center at Brandeis University for sponsoring this event. And thank you everyone for attending, with special thanks to Ilana's students of the course on disability cultures. I wanted to state that in terms of my PowerPoint presentation, which I know is not accessible to screen readers, I will read out loud the words in the text on the presentation slides and will offer audio descriptions of the images. And let me start the share screening. Okay. And let me know if there is any technical problem. In my 50-minute talk today, I will present insights from two of my studies. The first published in a recent book, as Ilana mentioned, from which I will present segments of one chapter discussing blind women's gender performance in Israel. And on the screen now is the cover of the book with its title on the left, and to the right of the title, a very simple black drawing of a woman's head and neck, all set against a bright pink color background. The second study is based on my ethnography in Israel and the US in the field of integrated dance, bringing together dancers with and without disabilities. And here you can see one image from my study of two dancers from Axis Dance Company, one a wheelchair user dancer who is leaning to his side, holding a non-disabled dancer above him in a lift, her right arm supporting herself from his wheelchair, her right foot is in his hand, and her left leg stretched above and behind him. If there are any urgent clarifying questions, I'll be happy to answer via chat, and I will be happy to take questions afterwards. Before I begin presenting my book, I would like to contextualize my studies within a broader anthropological approach. As a whole, my scholarly thinking is characterized by an interest in epistemological gaps. I'm interested in exploring the relationships between binaries, socio-cultural categories typically considered oppositional and conflicting, and the spaces where these categories are merged. Integrating fields of studies such as disability and sensory studies, anthropology of movement and disability embodiment, gender studies and blindness, I focus on case studies that challenge the construction of binarism. For example, my study with blind women challenges the assumed conflict between blindness and femininity, and the notion that being feminine to a degree requires the ability to see, which indeed is a belief that often results in the exclusion of blind women from the spheres of femininity, motherhood, and sexuality, with the normative aesthetic discourse of the feminine body excluding aids such as wheelchair, white cane, guide dog, or artificial limbs. My research with dancers with and without disabilities challenges the cultural separation between dance and disability, with dance traditionally associated with ability, strength, and physical capital, and disability stigmatically associated with weakness, dependency, and lack of physical strength. And in my current research on integrated theater, I focus on the assumed cultural gap between the sensible and the intelligible, between action and language. In all of these cases, my anthropological work points out the artificial nature of cultural binarism. Blind women, as my book argues, are not excluded from, but actually active participants in the gaze and visual culture. Dancers are to some degree obsessed with injuries and potential disability, while people with disabilities are many times expert in movement, actually aware of their body's movement and involvement in everyday tasks such as walking and breathing even. And sign language, as my current study with deaf and blind actors reveals, promotes dialogical relations among movement and experience alongside knowledge and language. My study with blind women is located in this anthropological approach, with performance being central to all of my work, as the title of this lecture demonstrates, disability on and off stage. I follow in the footsteps of disability studies scholars who have long argued for the ways people with visible disabilities serve as performers in their everyday lives, negotiating staring and stigmas projected by society. As Georgina Klieg, a prominent blind scholar, noted, you can't be anonymous and invisible as a disabled person out in the world. Disability, therefore, as the students of this course know already, posits a highly suitable case study for performance theory, and it integrates between the public and the private, between invisibility and hypervisibility, with the disabled body prompting what Rosemary Garland Thompson called persistent curiosity. Blind women in my study indeed describe the way they feel like performers when simply walking down the street. And women I interviewed talked about a common experience of being stared at. And in my book chapter on visual culture, I go into detail about this and the way blind women actively stare back. And this is the material that I sent Ilana's student. This recognition of performance as a central lens within the everyday lives of blind women led me to my work on disability culture and integrated dance. I was interested in how people with disabilities negotiate disability on an actual stage and choose performance as a professional career. These performances of disability that I've been studying for the last 15 years reveal the ways categories that are seemingly oppositional, such as ability and disability, blindness and sight, stillness and movement, coexist within social and theatrical performance and were never binaries to begin with. And final words of introduction regarding disability theory before offering examples from the book and addressing research questions and methodology. In addition to performance studies, my anthropological work resides within disability studies, an interdisciplinary field of theory and activism that examines disability from a critical perspective, which, as Ginsburg and Rapp stated, brings in the social, activist, reflexive, experiential, narrative, and phenomenological dimensions of living with particular impairments. My work follows the footsteps of the social model of disability, critiquing notions of normalcy and the medical view of disability, paying attention, for example, to the stigmatic ways blindness is perceived, to cultural barriers blind women in Israel face, and to lack of training available and discrimination against dancers with disabilities in the dance world. Alongside the social narrative, though, I follow disability studies' ontological call to take into consideration the disabled body. I expand the social analysis of disability to a sensory prism of blindness, what I call in the chapter of the book on the senses, Blind Women's Sensory Capital. And I look into kinesthetic experiences of movement and intimacy among dancers with and without disabilities. I would like to share some of the questions that drew me to study blind women in Israel with a 2-minute video, a segment of the film Blindness as Meta-Knowledge, created by the Israeli artist, fashion designer, and lecturer Orit Freilich. I'm back. So I think that this segment is helpful in delivering not only some of the humor, self-awareness, and creativity I encountered in my study, but also the reasons the study of blindness in general and blind women in particular is important for rethinking visual culture and gender performance. When I started this work, what drew me to study blind women was what I call an interpretational space that blindness creates within visual culture. In a modern Western context that has been identified as hypervisual, with sight being the dominant sense and most important and appreciated in our hierarchy of the senses, influencing not only social interaction, but science and technology, the way we conduct research with objective observations and learning. And in my course pre-COVID on anthropology of the senses, I usually ask students to pull out of their backpack the most important object they use on a day on campus, and it was always something visual, a screen of some type, a pen you write with. So in this hyper-visual context, blind women hold a unique position because even though they of course can read and hear written text and verbal explanations of an image and rely on touch and other senses when navigating visual culture, as social agents, they're involved in breaking down the visual into words, explanations, and sensations, as we saw with the example of the color identifying device, creating a sociological defamiliarization with the visual imprinting of standards such as beauty and femininity onto our collective consciousness. And although I have to note that this device is far from being accurate, that not every blind woman uses it, as I detail in the book, it's one example of the mediation that takes place between blind women and visual images and how they deconstruct images into voice, sound, touch, and feelings related to components such as light, shade, compression, texture, and look, all taken into consideration within gender performance. My study then, in terms of research questions, asked how the gaze functions when sight does not serve as the dominant mode of perception. What is the relation between visuality and women's agency? And how do the sensory apparatuses other than sight affect social relations and interactions? And you can see that these questions are not focused on whether blind women understand what beauty and femininity are, which of course they do, but on the how and why questions, exploring the creative and conscious choices they make when responding to visual norms, offering an ethnographic analysis of the ways blind women interpret, respond to, and sometimes resist normative images of gender, blindness, and femininity. In order to answer these questions, I conducted a multi-sided ethnography with blind people in Israel. Emphasizing first-person experience, the study included in-depth interviews with 40 women, mainly blind from birth or from a young age, yet from varied backgrounds in terms of age, marital status, ethnicity, geographical location, and profession. And some of the women became central interlocutors whom I interviewed multiple times over a 5-year period. In addition to interviews, the research included 3 years of ethnographic observations in spaces such as a beauty care class for blind girls, a life skills class for blind adults, a tandem cycling group pairing blind and sighted cyclists, and a dark museum exhibit where sighted visitors are led by blind guides. This ethnography offered the opportunity to investigate the formation of blindness and sight from varied subject positions. In the methodological chapter of the book, I detail what I call the methodology of sensory knowledge and my position as a sighted woman researcher. During the process of data analysis, 3 themes emerged, and the book is structured around them. And you can see the table of contents with the 3 thematic sections. The first on gender, the second on visual culture, and the third on the sensory body. And each section moves between research sites, bringing together interview narratives and fieldwork observations. And findings in general reveals the multiple senses involved in the formation of gender identity and how we use non-visual ways of knowing, our hearing, touch, and movement, together with seeing, to understand, interpret, and implement concepts such as beauty, appearance, and femininity. So what is exactly blind women's gender performance, and what are some Israeli aspects of it? Let me offer 2 quotes from interviews. Aviva, a 27-year-old woman, blind from age 6, said the following when I asked about the way she performs her femininity. I don't know how you express femininity when you are sighted. I don't know how you do it with sight, but I can tell my friends, I really feel like looking like $1 million tomorrow. So I'll do it, you understand? I'm preoccupied with it. I play with it. And Talia, 31-year-old, blind from age 3, described, I think about the difference between me and a sighted woman, someone who's surrounded by norms and things that show her what's right and what's not, what's fashionable and what's a no-no in fashion. On the one hand, we're supposed to be free from these norms because there's no constant visual feedback on a daily basis. While on the other, we're caged inside these norms because someone sighted will dictate to me what needs to be done. Aviva's and Talia's descriptions reveal some of the complexity of blind women's performance. First, they are aware of visual norms, preoccupied with it, as Aviva said, describing what blind scholars have addressed to as blind people's inner position within visual culture. Blind women I talked to were not only aware of visual norms, but also critical of them. I don't have the time to give examples, but you can find in the book many stories of women being critical of visual standards and making active choices regarding appearance based on familiarity with gender norms, perceptions, and expectations, performing what is called in feminist theory of appearance, skilled work. In this context, blind women employed appearance in order to deliver varied messages targeted toward resisting dehumanizing attitudes typical of the way society treats people with disabilities in general, as occupying what was called in the literature ambiguous personhood, non-person status, or humanity in doubt. As Aviva further explained, it is important for me to look good because I walk down the street and people look at me. So I want them to see something that looks good, not neglected. Like everything else, it started from I don't want them to pity me. I don't want to pity the poor blind woman. So people won't go and say, well, what can you expect? She's blind. And Ayelet, a 33-year-old congenitally blind woman, addressed the need to look decent, put together. I want people to look at me and say, she's okay. Her being blind doesn't make her ugly, and it's not like she doesn't take care of herself. I arrive at work with a neat shirt and wear makeup and earrings. I don't need them to think I'm pretty. That's really not the issue. What matters is that they look at me and don't see a damaged and ugly person. By performing what women called, for example, a respectful, pleasant, ordinary, communicative, or decent look, their appearance management included a duality, as we could see in Aviva's and Talia's descriptions, and with many examples in the book. On one hand, they expressed agency in choosing and managing their look, even playing with it, as Aviva said. And at the same time, they have to negotiate a sighted world, where vision is the dominant sense, and someone sighted dictates visual standards and norms. A dualism of agency and discipline, of playfulness and creativity, alongside constant awareness, were present in the many of the women's experiences. It reveals appearance management's dual role as a tool of stigma resistance, as well as a disciplinary mechanism of the feminine and disabled body, with appearance bearing important consequences to blind women, projecting messages about being able to perform as good employees, following a dress code, to be good mothers who take care also of the children's appearance, as suitable sexy intimate partners, and more. And as blind women, they were often the subjects of multiple types of gazes directed at them, with society assuming them, as with most women, to be preoccupied with appearance, while at the same time associating blindness with ignorance and lack of visual knowledge. As the previously mentioned blind scholar Georgina Klieg noted in the foreword of my book, about once a month someone asks me, do you know what you look like? The Israeli context played out in different ways within these systems of appearance management, and I will offer two examples related to religion and militaristic context, which differentiates in Israel within the disability community between disabilities associated with heroic contribution and what is called in social security general disabilities. And both issues affect both appearance management and dating, the sphere of dating and romantic relations, which women indicated as an important issue related to gender performance and where blindness plays a central role. In Israel, where traditional Jewish imagery and modern commercialism are constantly juxtaposed, blind women's choices and dilemmas of appearance management were influenced by religious affiliation, with Orthodox religious women discussing modesty norms related to clothes, making choices regarding whether or not to cover their head and the style of the headscarf, whether to wear pants or skirts and the length of the skirt, or whether to use cosmetics. Tamar, for example, a 24-year-old congenitally blind woman who is Orthodox religious, told me her opinion regarding the appropriate appearance of the modest body. And she described how she doesn't like to wear long skirts because it means she has to sit down very carefully. And although she finds pants much more modest, they are culturally unacceptable. And Aviva, who is not Orthodox but a traditional observant woman who immigrated from Ethiopia, also expressed her dilemma regarding wearing long skirts, being aware of the symbolic effect of her long skirt, which in the Israeli context is related to a cultural stereotype labeling Ethiopian Jews as religious. A long skirt, therefore, simultaneously projects messages regarding gender, religion, and ethnicity, and Aviva was frustrated with people typically associating her long skirt not with her feminine style, but with her assumed Orthodox religious identity. Women expressed their frustrations concerning stigmatic attitudes toward blindness, also in relation to their difficulty in finding a romantic partner, where religious women talked about society's expectations as expressed by matchmakers. It's really difficult to meet a guy when you can't see, said Liron, a single 30-year-old congenitally blind woman from a traditional religious background. And Adi, a religious married 25-year-old congenitally blind woman, described being confronted with stigmatic attitudes regarding her marriage options before her wedding. She said, society-wise, it was obvious that first of all, they needed to look for someone who had some kind of a problem and then to consider whether we're suited to each other. And it really pissed me off, really, because I don't think this should be our common ground. Not that I think they're less than me, but I wanted us to have other things in common. Such narratives reveal appearance management and gender performance issues that blind women on the religious spectrum must consider, exemplifying that religious concerns do not reduce the cultural emphasis on normative appearance, but like class, race, and other affiliations, they function as an additional set of rules concerning the female body. Within the area of romantic relations, the militaristic context also came up, and this was mentioned, for example, when women talked about the difference in attitudes toward disability among men versus women. In this regard, interviewees described women as being more open and accepting of a partner with a disability than men are, as blindness in their experience was intimidating for many men who assumed they would necessarily have to take on a caretaker role in a relationship with a blind woman. Rinat, a 44-year-old visually impaired woman who is divorced and a mother of one, addressed the differences between blind men and blind veterans. Take, for example, IDF disabled or blind men. Many of them are married to sighted women. Many. How many totally blind or visually impaired women are married to a sighted man? Maybe. I'm talking about astronomical percentages, about a huge gap. That's rare. When a woman goes out with her blind husband, with his guide dog, she'll say, "Hi, meet my husband." A man who walks out with a blind woman with the guide dog will say, "I'm helping her." Rinat's description illustrates some specific hardships blind women face within the Israeli context, where they negotiate not only stereotypes associating blindness with weakness, but also a social system that classifies a legitimate disability as one associated with a heroic contribution to society. Therefore, despite what feminist scholars see as the evolution of the Israeli family system, stigmas about blindness and disability have remained and continue to play a role in blind women's romantic relations. They are intertwined with what Sagit Mor and many other scholars called Israeli ableism, which has excluded deviant bodies and idealized the strong, masculine, healthy body of the pioneer, the sabra, the soldier, and the worker. Blind women's appearance management carries additional roles in the Israeli context, and I will mention one last point about that. And it can also serve as an opportunity of inclusion due to the collectivist history of Israel. In this context, in a collectivist society, individuals must prove their membership in and contribution to the national project in order to gain an entrance ticket into the collective. So people and groups gain membership through specific sites. It can be masculine militarism, feminine fertility, the display of modernity, or proper Jewishness among specific groups. Blind women's appearance management serves as a specific inclusion mechanism into the wider society, exempt from military service and therefore cannot enjoy the social glory associated with disabled veterans. The display of normal femininity and human subjectivity that I mentioned earlier with the examples of Aviva and Yayelet can be used in this setting as an alternative path into the public collective. The mastery of a normative look allows blind women to claim their belonging to a feminine ideal of womanhood and motherhood, while also proving their involvement in Western beauty discourse, which has increased during the past 3 decades as a result of a shift toward capitalism. To conclude and move to some examples for my second study, I think that my research with blind women is helpful in discussing the interplay of the local and the global. Although the research was done in Israel, its findings can be generalized more broadly to women's experiences in visual cultures. As women in this research are embedded in upper middle class American discourses of femininity and Western beauty, being exposed to a global flow of information. While the analysis in the book indeed contributes to understanding particular ways in which bodily difference and blindness are accommodated and maintained in Israel, the findings also capture the formation of categories such as gender, sexuality, disability, sight, and blindness within modern Western context more broadly, where the stigmas of blindness are global and deeply rooted in human thought, and women share a common experience of serving as a spectacle. While avoiding suggesting that the findings and the participants' experiences can be generalized to blind women in all cultures, I think that the gender performance of blind women I met with is important for rethinking, for example, a broader theory of stigma management, which is not targeted at passing as non-disabled. Blind women's negotiation of gender visual norms is not aimed at hiding blindness or at passing as sighted, and in contrast to findings in earlier studies, their narratives indicate that the purpose of their appearance management is to deliver complicated messages regarding the possibility of displaying femininity and personhood alongside blindness and disability at the same time and in the same body. A somewhat similar interplay of the local and the global is present in my more recent study in the field of integrated dance in Israel and the US, in which I examine different nuances of disability activism as expressed within the work of 6 integrated dance companies from the genres of ballet, modern dance, contact improvisation, dance theater, and breakdance. And you can see on the screen 3 examples from these companies. On the left is an image of 2 dancers from Axis. One is a non-disabled dancer using a crutch in his left hand as a means of support as he holds his body parallel to the floor. And disabled dancer is using the same crutch with her right hand to jump vertically in the air. The middle image portrays Luca Patuelli, the director of Ill Abilities and All Abilities International Breakdance Crew, using his crutches as support while holding his body parallel to the floor. And the right image is of a wheelchair user dancer and a non-disabled dancer, 2 women practicing integrated contact improvisation in Israel. Both of them are leaning back, one in her chair and one on her knees beside her, their left forearm across their chest and right arm stretched above their bodies. In this study, I do have a comparative perspective after conducting over 70 interviews with dancers, practitioners, directors, choreographers, and staff members with and without disabilities, and participant and non-participant observations of company classes, rehearsal, outreach programs, workshops, tours, and performances. All of the companies shared a common political goal of resisting the medical diagnosis of disability as a pathology and lack, as well as the normative aesthetic category of the fit, able-bodied dancer, considering disability as an artistic aesthetic that, as a skillful American wheelchair user, dancer, choreographer, and a director of an integrated dance company put it, speaks for, to, and about itself without the need to justify or seek approval from the mainstream dance world. So this disability activism was practiced in varied ways, depending not only on the geographical location of the company or nationality, and I interviewed people of Israeli, American, Swedish, Scottish, British, Dutch, Indian, Canadian, and Russian origins, but also on the artistic style, which of course is very different between the companies. And dancers from all over the world had to take very complicated political decisions related, for example, to whether to perform in an inaccessible location, how to use props such as wheelchairs on stage, whether non-disabled dancers should use them, and if and how to include disability in the content of the art. Additional specific dilemmas regarding artistic decisions came up, of course, in different contexts, with dance companies in the US discussing the intersectionality of race and disability and how to promote racial integration in addition to disability. And dancers in Israel confronted issues related to religion, for example, when required to teach an all-women class of Orthodox participants whose religion forbids them from having a male dancer. Raising the question of whether to cooperate with a gender-based segregation, especially when the male dancer is the teacher with the disability. Israeli politics also came up when dancers needed to decide whether to perform in the West Bank. On some occasions, though, it was really interesting to see how disability integration breaks down barriers based on race, nationality, and religion, and I'll be happy to offer some examples in the Q&A if we'll have time. To conclude, if I were to summarize my works on the performance of disability on and off stage and my broader scholarly process, I would say that I'm occupied with the puzzle of whether society can sustain equality alongside diversity, and if so, how? Or as scholar of anthropology of performance asked, in which ways the deeply different can be deeply known without becoming any less different? And the image I included here is an enlargement of a drawing I saw on my way to the integrated theater I study in Jaffa, showing 5 roughly drawn images in vertical color blocks of blue, green, yellow, and red. From left to right, a man in the blue block, a woman in the green block, a person in a wheelchair in the yellow block, an elderly person using a cane, and a blind person with a cane in the red block, each with an equal sign between them, and the words above in Hebrew read, everybody is different, everybody is equal. Karin, a 45-year-old visually impaired woman, captured this tension that I'm studying between diversity and equality, and in her experience between normalcy and normativity. And she said the following in our interview, and with her words, I will conclude. She told me, I'm always in some kind of awareness, but this is me, you understand? Gili, this is me. I've accepted this effort, I've embraced it, it raises me, it pushes me forward, I'm attached to its aesthetics, to the movement in it. Do you experience putting on lipstick as an effort? You don't have to answer me. There are days when I feel tired from being careful all the time. And on other days, it's really fun for me, you understand? Am I allowed to say I feel good in this way? Will people believe me? I'm not sure they will. It will be a huge waste of energy to say I'm totally normal and I'm doing everything normally. No, it's not true. Of course I'm normal, but I'm not normative like anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gili, for that amazing presentation. I have many, many questions. Please, of course, continue to send your questions in. And, I'll just start by saying, I remember thinking, in my introduction to performance studies classes, right, you talk about performance as twice behaved behavior, right? And I think you did such a beautiful job of showing how that applies, not just, of course, to the dancers that you study, but to these women and how they lead their lives. I want to take up a suggestion that you mentioned, or a possibility, and that's a question of, breakdown. You talk about Israeli women, some of them are religiously observant, some of them not. Were there Israeli Palestinian women in your sample, right? Are there other differences of class, ethnicity, etc., that you noticed while you were doing your research?
So should I answer now, one by one?
Yes, answer now, and yes.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you. Yes, so I had a few Arab women. They were all Israeli citizens, but some of them identified as Palestinians, some as Israeli Arab. Not many. It is had to do with accessibility issues related to me being a Jewish researcher. And their experiences were very interesting. I didn't talk with many of them. I did encounter for example, one of my field sites was in Haifa, which is an integrated city in terms of Jewish and Arab people. And in my observation sites, there was a lot of national religion-based integration. but I cannot, generalize to my findings. I think it would be amazing to do this type of research about with Palestinian women. It would be amazing. Another thing that was crucial was sexuality. And of course, I talk about it in the section on romantic relations, because the vast majority of my interviewees were, so I had only one woman identified as lesbian, and it has to do with a difficulty of occupying two marginal identities. So people I talked to, even off the record, said how challenging it is to, to be accepted as gay within the disability community, while also being accepted as blind in the gay community. So it's another thing that was tricky, the thing about sexuality. But in terms of ethnicity, age, class, women came from all over the spectrum of affiliations.
Thank you. I wanted to ask more about education. And so are these women, is education for the blind integrated in Israel? Do they go to separate schools? And how does that function both for, let's say, K through 12 and also higher education as well?
This is a great question. And I saw a gap in generations, because I think that until, I'm not expert in special education, but I think that, so in the past, blind students were segregated, with even going to special education, which is really were not suited for them, because they didn't have any cognitive or issues that needed any accommodation with. But in the past, they were segregated either in blind schools or special education. So women that I interviewed who were above 60 or 55-year-old were studying, had this kind of experience and could really talk about it, while younger women I interviewed were already included in regular education. So usually you have a school with a few blind students and they are in a regular class, but also have special, meetings just for blind students. But it was a really interesting generation gap. And interestingly, now when I work with deaf people, I think that with deafness in Israel, they didn't do this progress yet. Many times, deaf students are still sent to special education or segregated education, which I'm not against, but it's interesting also to see the differences between the accommodation of blindness and deafness in the Israeli education system.
Yeah, so there's a question from a student that, and they say that your work is in the social model of disability. So why did you choose that? How has that been a helpful model? Are there some ways that it's been limiting? And maybe for those of us who are not lucky enough to be in Professor Sobel's class, to remind us of this social model of disability and what it means first.
Okay, so in disability studies in general, they usually talk about three models: the moral model, the medical model, and the social model. And each has a different approach to how to define disability, what is the problem, and how to solve the problem. So the social model in different than the medical model doesn't see disability as a pathology needing cure or medical solution, but more of a social situation. And usually the most simple way to demonstrate it, that I can do this exercise now, that I ask all the people just to imagine that you sit in a wheelchair. And then I just ask you to answer the question of whether you could enter your own home if you are in a wheelchair. And many, many times the answer is no. So this is exactly the social model, that it indicates how the problem, if we can call it like this, is really with accessibility and the how we build the environment and the law and discrimination, and not in the body and not with the individual person with the disability. So this is, I can talk about it a lot, but I will stop here. So yes, I follow, of course, the social model of disability, and especially with blindness, which is not an illness. So many blind women in my study told me, people see me on the street and tell me, oh, תהי בריאה, you know, like feel well. I don't know how you translate it very well.
Be well, be healthy, right?
Yeah, so it's a very common phrase in Hebrew. And they say, but I'm not sick, you know? So with blindness in particular, it's very interesting to see how society treats it through a medical prism while it's not even an illness. And I see, you know, each in a while you can see news about curing blindness. And so it's interesting with blindness in particular, but I do expand the social analysis to embodied experiences and to more recent development in disability studies, more also the radical model of disability, the affirmative model of disability, and also into really to take into considerations embodied sensory experiences of people with disabilities is kind of, you know, left aside with the social model.
Thank you. So we had a question come in about theatrical performance that I'm definitely familiar with, and it's probably familiar with a lot of visitors. That's the idea of Nalagat, right? This theater where it was performed exclusively by blind actors. I know that there's been some controversy about Nalagat, so I was wondering if you could refer to that. And there was a follow-up, are there other areas, you talked about dance, but are there other cultural areas when there's been more inclusion of disabled people?
So with Nalagat, the theater actually started from deaf-blind actors. Okay. So they are simultaneously deaf and blind. So this required special accommodation. It's not enough to have sign language, and it's not enough, they cannot see and they cannot hear. So they actually use a special tactile sign language that you do it on the hand, on the palm of the hand. And the show in particular, I think, is really, really interesting in terms of translation and accommodation, because the people who started it runs for many, many years now. But when it started, the director really tried to think about common experience that audience member and actors can use. So for example, they make bread on stage. So they use the sense of smell that everyone can share. Or for example, they use a time frame that everyone can understand of the time it takes for the bread to be ready. So they use very, very interesting types of accommodations and sensory translations. But what I think is really interesting about Nalagat, that it's a multisensory center. So it has the theater, it has the coffee shop with mainly deaf waiters, and it has a workshop center that really many people from all over the country come and hear and see and learn. So this is what I find interesting about this, more than the theater, the fact that it's a multisensory center and it hires deaf and blind people, just as, you know, it's not a, we call it in Hebrew, mif'al mugan, like a safe factory. I don't know how you translate it. It's not a community-based, you know, something that operates out of mercy or pity for blind or deaf people. It's just a normative workplace paying a decent and normative salary, and people can be in the theater or in the coffee shop, but also just in the office. So you have people with disabilities being in central jobs of the center. So this is just a little bit. And in terms of other areas, I think that there are changes. There are changes, and I started this study in 2006, and I see the changing happening on some scales. For example, with the deaf community, there have been many, many changes. There is a very strong deaf activism in Israel in the last few years, and it's very interesting to see it.
Yeah. Right. Actually, a couple of years ago, we hosted a deaf filmmaker in a different version of Professor Sobel's class who spoke about similar issues. So and we actually have a question from Professor Sobel, and she says, in your work, when you talk about integrated disabilities, you're talking about physical disabilities. Are there integrated dance companies that include other kinds of disabilities?
Yes, so thank you for this question. So yes, it's mainly physical disabilities from very, very big variety. So it can even be people using wheelchairs because of different reasons. It can be, but the companies do also have, some of the companies, especially the contact improvisation one, also include people with cognitive disabilities of different type who take active roles and even teach and participate in all the workshops. I had some pictures, but I decided to limit them. And so yes, some of them include people with cognitive disabilities or blind dancers, but it's also an interesting question with dance because it's a visible art. So some of the companies really had dilemma whether to hire and put on stage a dancer with invisible disability because it's such a visible art. So, you know, audience comes and really expects to see people with disabilities on stage. So some of the companies, when they hired people with invisible disabilities, had to do some absurd performances of coming on stage and say, okay, this and this person have disabilities because they were invisible, and the audience were kind of mad for not seeing the disability, or, you know, frustrated.
Can you just give an example of what an invisible disability might be?
Deafness.
Deafness, okay.
Cognitive disabilities of many types. So I would say that it is an interesting issue, the question of visible and invisible disabilities in integrated dance, because of the visibility of this art. You know, imagine what you put on a poster when you want to promote integrated dance, and the audience expectations. So it's interesting to see how the artists and directors and choreographers have to play with this and deliver some messages of who is disabled and who is not, because this is something that the audience expects to know.
Right. There's a question from a student that I love. I want to make sure I say, I'm going to sort of say how I understand it, but for the student, if I'm not saying it correctly, please just type in the chat and I will correct myself. And because I think they're asking a really essential question, and that's the question of representation, right? And they ask, through performance, is there a way to illustrate or represent people with disabilities that are important for that? How should I say this? I'll back it up. If the artist's creator is not disabled, right? And maybe the audience is not disabled, but they want to integrate these experiences. Do you think that there's a way to do that sort of ethically and responsibly, or should be something sort of disabled people make disabled art, sort of questions about, similar to maybe what we have about race and casting in Hollywood today? And I'm sure there's a variety of opinions, but I'm just curious what the discourse is on these things.
Yes, it is a very important question. Let me answer in two levels, okay? First of all, I think it also relates to research. You know, who can research whom? And many times I had to answer the question of my positionality as a sighted woman. I'm not sure I can identify as a non-disabled woman, but this is another story. But I am not blind. And I had to really think about it. And I have a whole section in the book about it. And one thing that I decided to do in the prologue of the book, in the last section, I write an autoethnography, because I felt that the moral thing to do is also to direct the questions that I asked all the women to myself, and that I should also answer them, how visuality played out in my life. But essentially, I thought about myself as a person, as a woman, negotiating visual culture and appearance, talking with other women, negotiating bodily experiences, and I never for 1 second pretended to know how they feel, or trying to go blind or something like that, but do my work as an ethnography, talking and learning from people I work with to say something essential about the phenomenon that I look at. So this is one level that is also important for research. And in terms of performance, of artistic performance, in all of the companies I studied, they had a choreographer with a disability. So actually, for all of the 6 companies had a person with a disability either directing or choreographing, or maybe with the Israeli contact improvisation project, they are co-directing. It's always someone with and someone without. And for many of the companies, for each outreach program, they always send 2 people at least, and it always, it would never be just someone who is not disabled. So it's a very important thing. Even in some companies, they don't do solos because they want it to be always integrated. So there are many, many artistic choices you need to make if you want to put the integration on stage. And it sometimes can be frustrating for dancers, you know, not to do solos and always have to be on stage, someone with and someone without a disability. It's a question. But I do think that it's very essential. Sorry. I do think that it's extremely essential for the creator. Sorry, 1 minute.
No, take a sip of water, please.
So I do think that it's extremely essential for the creator to have a disability if you create an artistic work about disability. And actually in Israel, I'm in a team that we are trying to establish a new training program for artists and creators with disabilities in following the Nahla Gat question, because both Nahla Gat and a team of researchers understood that one of the problems is that they need to have creators with disabilities. So it is an essential point.
Yeah, thank you. We have time, I think, for one more question. And I want to just ask you about how COVID has affected this community, right? There are some things I'm sure that have been easier, some things that have been more difficult, both in the arts world and in general, and in terms of how we think about accessibility.
Yes, I actually think that the dance world reacted in very creative ways to COVID. I mean, it took some time, but all of the companies put some online workshops, online dance jams. With the Israeli project, I even participated and documented an online series of meetings they offered for people with and without. And it raised interesting questions because when you're on Zoom, usually you cannot see the wheelchair or the disability. So it really changes the way you perceive people. And, you know, for example, there was one participant in a Zoom integrated dance workshop I documented who had to actually stand up and show that one of his legs are missing. And he would never have to do it in studio. So it's interesting what Zoom brings into the discussion. And actually for the dance companies that I studied, it was easier than for the theater company. Because with an embodied, which was really surprised me how they were very creative to start online workshops and to bring it to this kind of work.
I want to thank you again for an incredible presentation about a topic that, you know, that we don't speak about enough. I want to thank Alana, Professor Sobel for organizing, and of course, Anna and Risa, who are helpful behind the scenes. And of course, thank all of you for coming in the audience. I remind everyone to please check out our website, all our social media, for what's coming up next, including part 2 of the series about disability in Israel, which will be on April 22nd, with a lecture from Sunny Yudkov about tradition, tuberculosis, and the creation of Yiddish poetry, which should be an amazing and important discussion as well. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.